Well, good morning. My name's Dave Hodgson, the elected Mayor of Bedford Borough Council and Chair of the England's Economic Heartland Strategic Transport Forum. And welcome to this launch of the draft transport strategy, which is now open for consultation. England's Economic Heartland, covering a geography from Swindon to Cambridgeshire and Northamptonshire to Hertfordshire, one of the world's leading economies, powered by science and technology innovation. This strategy enables the region's transport systems to underpin a green recovery from COVID-19 pandemic while supporting a sustainable economic growth. It will support our residents and businesses to have a greater access to opportunities while ensuring we tackle the climate emergency and protect the region's environment. The publication of the draft strategy follows engagement on our outline transport strategy last year, when we were told to be bold in our ambitions for the transport strategy. Its development has been steered by the Strategic Transport Forum of elected members from across the region. I'd like to thank them for their involvement and work on the strategy. We know there is scope for doing things differently, as demonstrated by experience during COVID-19, where we've seen an increase in our use of flexible and remote working and greater walking and cycling. The strategy provides a step change in the way we approach connectivity, because we know that business as usual will not allow us to meet the ambitions of the region. I'd like to encourage residents and businesses to take part in the consultation to help shape the final strategy. More information and a survey available on the England's Economic Heartland website. The consultation closes on midnight on October the 6th, and the final strategy will be released at the turn of the year. I'm delighted to be joined on the screen by Greg Smith, MP for Buckingham and member of the Transport Select Committee, who I'm going to ask to say a few words and then have a brief chat to. And I know Greg's got to leave reasonably soon after that for parliamentary business. And then we'll ask Martin Tugwell, who's the Programme Director for the England's Economic Heartland, to give us a short presentation before we open up for a panel for questions and answers. I'm going to hand over to Greg to make a few comments. Greg.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor Dave. It is great to be joining this webinar this morning as part of the new normal, as we all get used to staring at our own computer screens rather than meeting face to face. And I very much hope that actually face-to-face meetings can resume soon, but clearly we've all learnt to use technology, use Zoom, whatever this one's called, GoToWebinar, FaceTime, etc. And that is going to stay with us for a very long time. And as your strategy document points out, and as everybody is talking at the moment, that is going to have a massive impact on the demand for transport, just as COVID at large and public confidence is going to have a massive impact on future transport demand, whether that is from increased demand for active travel, for walking and cycling, e-scooters. The Transport Select Committee looked at e-scooters the other week, which are obviously being piloted at the moment in the United Kingdom, to the other end of the spectrum, where one of the first reports that the Select Committee has produced around the impact of COVID on transport is on the aviation sector, where it looks like we're 3 to 5 years away from having passenger numbers back at where they were before lockdown. And that clearly has a massive impact, not just on the ability of airlines to survive, airports to survive, but actually it shapes the future quite considerably. And I was pleased to see in the strategy document considerable talk about freight. And air freight actually is a key part of the supply chains for many of our businesses. But what many don't realise is that between 40 and 60%, depending on the route, of air freight actually goes in the belly hold of passenger aircraft rather than on dedicated freight flights. And so in terms of keeping supply chains moving, particularly from our manufacturing businesses, of which I am pleased to say there are plenty, and it is a growing sector across the Heartland, industrial parks like Silverstone Park in my constituency, or Westcott, right across the region, I think we are going to see a big change in where freight has to get to by road or rail in order to be put on an aircraft, because it makes sense if the passenger planes aren't flying as much and you can't put as much freight onto those, there are going to have to be more dedicated freight flights, and that probably doesn't mean Heathrow. That probably means the cheaper landing slots at some of the smaller airports, which actually is probably good news for this region. So I was pleased to see that highlighted. Now, as we do look forward, and the Select Committee is going to move on later this year to look at the future of transport rather than simply what's happening today mid-pandemic to the sector. There are a lot of very key questions which this strategy talks about, and which I very much encourage everyone to take part of the consultation on. Just looking at my constituency alone, there is a lot of change happening that is transport driven. So the most controversial one is clearly HS2, where and I'll be totally upfront that I've always opposed HS2 as a project. I think it's entirely the wrong project, and indeed its reclassification into the red zone in the report the other day does nothing but confirm that, in that I'm not sure going forwards, given what I said about transport demand a few minutes ago, there is necessarily going to be the demand for what will inevitably an enormously expensive ticket to go from London, Birmingham, Manchester, and beyond when future elements of the project are brought forward. And that clearly is going to have an impact on the presumptions around how much can go on the West Coast Main Line in terms of either freight capacity or additional passenger capacity. And it's clearly years off being built, but I think that is something we do have to be aware of as to how unaffordable HS2 will be for the end user once it does start actually rolling. Then we've got the elements of transport from the ARC right through the middle of my constituency. Very, very pro East-West Rail, very, very anti the expressway. East-West Rail, I think, actually is going to be a real game changer, particularly for Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire, North Buckinghamshire, Milton Keynes, obviously across to Cambridge. Barely any of the track involves knocking anything down, in that it is bringing old railway lines back to life. And I think that the ability to go purely from my perspective in North Buckinghamshire, from Milton Keynes across to Bicester, or on the Claydon-Aylesbury spur to intersect with the Chiltern line to come into London, is actually going to give people in Winslow, where there's a new station, or the Claydons, or many places where at the moment, if you want to get on a train, you have no option but to drive for at least 10, 15, 20, 25 minutes. That is going to give people the ability to get on the railway a lot easier. And that can only be a very positive thing. Of course, we've got the debate over electrification. It is the case that the Department of Transport have ordered bimode trains for East-West Rail, so the option is there. Although one of the things that I am very excited about looking for the future is the potential for hydrogen trains. There are hydrogen trains up and running. There's a pilot in Germany where they've successfully got hydrogen trains running. And whilst there is still the small issue that they can't go in a tunnel, I'm sure that the technology will be developed, and that we will be at a point where actually far cleaner than electric, we may be able to look at hydrogen trains for when the life cycle of those bimode trains runs out. On the expressway, I am not sold on the case for building major new motorways through Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire and beyond. I don't think the demand is necessarily there for that, and I also having got the scars on my back from the devastation that the build of HS2 is causing, think that it will ruin too many lives, take away too many farms, business land, residential properties, for something that actually we could do a lot more sensibly and a lot better by improving existing roads, which the strategy document clearly does talk about. And so I've very much pushed the government not to go ahead with the expressway. And indeed, when RIS2 was published in the March budget, the expressway was not one of those green lighted projects, but put into the paused column. And I continue to press the Department of Transport, along with local authorities, to look at the alternatives, improving the roads we've already got. I know Oxfordshire is very keen on upgrades to the A34, and to then, where local communities consent to them, look at where we can build relief capacity to keep the roads moving faster. I mean, the example I always give is around the village of Wing, which is in my constituency, but right next to Leighton Buzzard. They take an enormous amount of north-south traffic from Aylesbury to Leighton Buzzard up to Milton Keynes, right through the middle of that village. And they've been calling for a local bypass there for some time. So those are the sort of road projects that I very much think we should be looking at. So where do we go from here? Clearly, the decarbonisation agenda is crucially important. And within that, I think I mentioned hydrogen in relation to trains a few moments ago, but I actually am very much of the view that we need to be taking hydrogen much more seriously as a long-term clean solution for all modes of transport, particularly personal vehicles and the motor car, because at the end of the day, I don't think we can just dismiss personal vehicles. I know with a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old that, I can't put them on the back of a bike. And for a lot of families, we can't say that cars are not part of the future, because they clearly are part of the future, but we've got to look at the way to make them cleanest. And whilst electric is clearly a wonderful technology for the here and now, when the wheels are rolling, they are very, very clean. When you do look at the whole life cycle of electric vehicles, from the raw earth mining that goes into the batteries, to the carbon footprint of the construction of an electric vehicle, to the disposal at the end of life of those batteries and those vehicles, it is possible that we are looking at 10, 20 years down the line, the next diesel in terms of environmental challenge. And the more we can put into hydrogen, which still brings with it its challenges, I think that is potentially the way we get to a much better, much cleaner way of delivering net zero by 2050 than necessarily sticking 100% to battery electric. And I'd welcome people's thoughts on that. I think I'm probably getting towards the end of my 5 minutes, but really to say the digital agenda is obviously important. I think we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but really to say this is an excellent strategy document. I've certainly enjoyed reading it a couple of times now, and very much encourage everyone to take part in the consultation and get their views heard.
Thanks very much, Greg. I think you just touched on the digital there, and very wide ranging, and lots of things for us to think about. I was going to ask you about digital. I'm going to use Chair's prerogative. It always worries me that Highways England have 2 projects called the Expressway. One is to the east of Bedford, on the Bedford to Cambridge, and I think that's got popular support in its upgrade of existing road. And I think when I hear from as Mayor of Bedford that the expressway is dead, I understand the Milton Keynes to Oxford bit, but the eastern side I think is a different project. So I wish they'd call them different things rather than the same name for 2 projects.
Yeah, that's a fair point. The controversial element of the Oxford to Cambridge Expressway is the Oxford to Milton Keynes bit of it, and that's largely because, as you said, the ability to deliver it going from Milton Keynes across to Cambridge through Bedfordshire, obviously, has largely been improvements to an existing network, whereas to get from Oxford to Milton Keynes is essentially digging and concreting. It's essentially as bad as HS2, just going east-west rather than north-south, and the environmental destruction it would bring.
And just, you touched upon the digital side. How important is it that we invest in digital as well as the transport infrastructure?
I think it's absolutely crucial because, one will influence the other, in that future transport demand will be influenced by how good connectivity is, particularly in small towns, market towns like Winslow, Princes Risborough, Buckingham, in my constituency, as well as our rural spots, the villages and the hamlets. And I've got to say that through lockdown, it's become very, very clear to me that we're not even there yet in terms of fibre broadband, let alone gigabit or the very, very fast broadband offerings. And actually, mobile phones aren't that great either in a lot of rural spots. Certainly across a lot of my constituency, whilst I don't want to do any false advertising here, but I know EE is very strong, whereas some of the other networks aren't. And I'm very pleased that actually the government did a deal with all the networks just before the general election, which should be going live this year, that's going to force them to share their networks, so that if you're on one network that isn't very good in the middle of the countryside, but another network can do it, for the first time, actually they're going to be forced to share their infrastructure so that we can improve mobile signal. But going forwards, there's a two-pronged attack. We've got to get rid of the rural not spots so that people have the ability to make a phone call. Certainly throughout lockdown, I ended up using Skype for business and other things through the computer to make calls, because I couldn't rely on my mobile to hold a reasonable time.
It's something that Council Tech raises every time we have a meeting with them, about the inability to go from one place to the other without losing, dropping out at some stage. So yeah.
Indeed. And then obviously we've got to get the wired broadband right as well, and gigabit is going to be a big part of that.
Finally, just wondered how we ensure that these priorities and the priorities of the Heartland are actually heard in Westminster and Whitehall. Any sort of tips for us?
Absolutely. I mean, that's an important question, no matter what the subject matter anybody wants to raise is. And I think the first thing is obviously the economic heartland is huge. I think 5.1 million population. There's a lot of members of parliament in there, and we all get an enormous amount of email traffic, of post on a daily basis. But I think it's very, very important, probably through local government, to ensure that every member of parliament in the patch is aware of this document, because I have to say they might not be. And to ensure that they've engaged with it, maybe try and set up one-to-one Zoom calls or whatever it may be to properly engage each of them with it, so that they fully understand what is in the strategy, and that they can feed in points from their own constituency, mailbags and conversations with their own local authorities and other stakeholders, to ensure that we are talking about it here in Westminster. Because it is very easy on a day-to-day basis for things that aren't maybe in the news that day to be forgotten about and not spoken about. So that would certainly be a first point of call. I think it would also be an interesting way to go, to see if, as the document, the consultation finishes, to see if the Transport Select Committee might want to do a session looking at the impact of strategies, maybe not just this one, but localized regional transport strategies from across the whole country, so that we can engage that national debate a little bit more. And second, the other part of that, of course, is engaging with ministers. And probably the best way to do that is to ensure that MPs are asking questions in transport question time around it. Maybe look to find an MP, and who knows, it might be me, to maybe host an adjournment debate around this particular strategy, so that, because that forces a minister to have to respond to it. And if there are issues,
I'm going to take that as an offer.
All right, okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, your words. It's given us lots of things to think about. There are over almost 300 people online, and if we were in a normal setting, we'd be asking for a round of applause. So maybe 281 different places, the round of applause. Thank you very much, Greg. And hopefully, I know you've got to shoot off, but hopefully you might be able to stay for some of Martin's presentation.
Yes, I will.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Martin Tugwell, who's the Programme Director, who has actually managed to get the slides up, and who's going to take us through the draft transport strategy before we go into the panel discussion and Q&A. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Dave, and good morning, everybody. And just to build on Greg Smith's excellent introduction there, just to let him know that we'll be emailing copies of this strategy out to all of his colleagues in Parliament after the consultation, after the launch today. Connecting people, transforming journeys. The draft strategy is your opportunity to help shape the future of your transport strategy moving forward. Recent months have shown that there's nothing fixed about the way we travel, the need to travel. For some businesses, we've seen greater use of flexible and remote working, but for others, there's still a very real need to get people into a place where they can work and deliver services. Of course, the key thing there is to make sure that they can do that safely. Likewise, at home, we've seen changes in our travel choices. But deep down, being able to meet friends and family, to visit places, to experience life, well, that all remains fundamental to the human experience, and transport remains fundamental to that in its own right. What is clear is that we have an opportunity right here, right now, to shape our future. And this is your chance through the consultation to shape it. Now, Heartland is an economic success story. Science and technological innovation, powered by our network of world-leading universities and research centres, makes the Heartland a national asset for the UK. As a region, we're home to advanced manufacturing, not just in Formula One and Formula E, but right across the manufacturing sector. We're the home of world-leading excellence in life sciences. We're at the front of cutting-edge experience in the space sector. And we've got a creative and digital sector that leads the world. But whilst we're very successful, that success cannot be taken for granted. And indeed, just like any individual business that requires a continual investment to maintain its success, so the Heartland needs to continue to have investment in its infrastructure if we are going to be successful moving forward. From cities whose history is counted in millennium to those that are a little younger, the region is a region of contrasts. Over 35% of our residents live in the network of small market towns and surrounding rural areas. The mix of natural and built, urban and rural environment makes the Heartland an attractive place to work, live and play. But it's also a region with challenges. Poor transport connectivity leaves many rural areas with limited choices. And if we think about some of the social inequalities we have across the region, then poor transport connectivity is also a factor there. More generally, our residents are likely to travel further and they're likely to use their car more than the national average. So it's little wonder that as a transport system, transport is responsible for nearly 50% of our carbon dioxide emissions. And more worryingly, it's been growing at a rate faster than the national average. So we need a step change. A step change is required if we're going to address the challenges that our transport system already faces. Even more critical, we need that step change if we are to continue to realise our economic potential, and more importantly, deliver it in the form of a sustainable growth moving forward. You heard earlier how responses to the outlined transport strategy highlighted the region's desire to be bold in the strategy, to view our strength as a region in science and technology as an opportunity to develop and deliver new solutions, which both improve connectivity and achieve net environmental gain. Now, that ambition is captured in the strategy's vision and the policies that flow from it. And we're seized by the need to seize the opportunity to harness the Heartland's strengths to deliver new business solutions, to place a new approach to transport at the heart of our work, or rather talk about connectivity as being at the heart of a green recovery. Our current pattern of travel and consumption of resources is not sustainable moving forward. We know we have a legal requirement to achieve net zero carbon no later than 2050. And as a region, well, we'd like to better that, but that will require concentrated and coordinated activity across society as a whole. Through the strategy, though, we can pursue the need to decarbonise our transport system. We are championing the electrification of our railways and our roads, and in fact championing the development of low carbon and zero carbon technologies more generally. We'll use the hierarchy of modes to reshape our transport system, to put the needs of the user at the heart of it. And we'll make sure that when we're prioritising, it won't just be on the basis of good value for money, but for their contribution towards delivering the net zero emissions target and wider sustainability and environmental goals. Our draft transport strategy draws on the output of some technical studies, one of which is the Pathways to Decarbonisation, published as a supporting document today. And our adopted pathway set out in the strategy brings together two approaches: the importance of ensuring we have a highly connected transport system that allows us to get information to users, to better manage the network, and yes, to enable the rapid deployment of connected and autonomous vehicles. But we also need to use policy levers to effect a behavioural shift and help reduce reliance on the car. And more generally, through EEH's work on wider strategic infrastructure, we'll make sure that our investment on transport is aligned with investment in digital infrastructure and the need to improve our energy systems. In this way, we believe that the Heartland can seize the opportunity for change in work patterns, change in travel patterns, change in our approach to connectivity. Improving east-west connectivity provides the overriding transformational opportunity for the Heartland, unlocking also in the process opportunities to improve north-south connectivity. And improved connectivity will help transform a region of discrete areas into one that offers enhanced opportunities, not just for businesses, but for individuals. Investment on the scale of East-West Rail and the Cambridgeshire Autonomous Metro, the CAM, these are transformational schemes in their own right, and they will act as a catalyst for opening up new travel opportunities and supporting planned growth. But we must also ensure that in offering to the travelling public, the transport opportunities, it's to the highest possible standard, that it's safe, it's clean, and high quality. We need to restore confidence, not just for the short term, but for the long term. And even then, in delivering the strategic infrastructure, that has got to be supported by and complemented by investment in local connectivity. We need to use the hierarchy modes to shape the detail of detailed proposals, to repurpose the space in our urban areas to encourage more active travel, more walking, more cycling, and we need to do it at scale. We need to think creatively about how we improve connectivity for our market towns and our rural communities, how we can create hubs in those communities that allow individuals and businesses to access services, but without the need to travel so far. We need to ensure that our approach to connectivity reflects the diversity of our communities and that our approach introduces social inequality by improving access to opportunities. At a time when our town centres are undergoing further change, when the ways our offices are working are changing, we need to be ambitious in seeking to do things differently and then secure the funding to make it happen. And we mustn't forget that freight and logistics is a key sector for us. It's one of the largest contributors in carbon emissions, but it's also one of the most difficult to implement solutions to reduce those emissions. But we must continue to plan for and meet the need for freight and logistics as part of our transport system. And we're already seeing innovation in action across the region, where it's coming to helping to improve servicing to businesses and providing customers with innovative ways of actually getting access to their goods. And we need to ensure that we have the capacity on our rail network to encourage a more modal shift of freight from road to rail, not just to the benefit of the region, but for the UK as a whole. We believe that the draft transport strategy represents a step-changing approach to the development of it, one that reflects the ambition of our region. And we'll use our programme of connectivity studies moving forward, the first of which will begin later this year, to work with our partners, our business community and our residents to deliver that step change on the ground. We have a moment in time to shape the way forward unlike any other in recent years. We need to look to the future to be ambitious in our vision, not just for our communities, but also for our economy. And we need to harness the strengths of our economy to make that vision a reality. The draft transport strategy is your opportunity to help shape your future. It is your chance to help shape tomorrow, today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for that. So we're joined on screen by Emily Seabrook, Emily's a graduate civil engineer with one of our delivery partners at Skanska and works for Oxfordshire County Council. She won the England's Economic Heartland Vision 2050 competition, which invited young professionals to submit their vision for the future of the transport systems. And we're also by Laura Church. Laura is the Corporate Director for Place and Infrastructure at Luton Council, chairs the OxCam ARC Environmental Working Group, and also chairs the Officer Group for England's Economic Heartland. Some of you already discovered this, but if you've got questions, if you go to the questions section and put your questions in there, we'll keep an eye on them. We'll try and answer as many as possible, but we will get back to everybody. If you've got a question, we don't answer it before noon. I'm just going to kick off with a question for Emily. Emily, this is a long-term strategy, and you're at the beginning of your career as a civil engineer. What do you think is the biggest opportunities to improve our transit system over the long term?
I think it's twofold, really, for us young people. I think the freight section of it is really important, but also to make the travel really people-centered. So it's actually meeting the needs of how we live and how because being a young person, I think we have a lot more reliance on technology and delivery. So the freight system is really important, but sitting alongside what we require and how we require the system to work for us, and so that it's easy and we're supported by the system to make environmentally friendly decisions. So I think they're the two big opportunities that I see in it.
Okay, have any other panelists got any sort of comments on Emily's thoughts there? Laura?
I absolutely agree with Emily around that piece, that the transport strategy's got to be around people, and the work that we need to do on encouraging some of the changes in behaviour. So one of the things that the Environment Working Group has contributed to the debate is some work that's been going on around behavioural insights and thinking about how do we get people to make decisions differently. COVID's given us an opportunity to kind of see what happens around that, but actually the people part of the transport strategy's got to be at the heart of it.
Thanks very much. Martin, any thoughts in terms of?
Well, just building on both Emily and Laura's contribution there. I mean, we are a remarkably diverse region in terms of the population, in terms of age profile and all the other characteristics that make up humanity. So we've got to make sure that our approach listens to the needs of everyone, and it is a much more diverse approach in terms of the types of solutions we put forward. We've done some work in support of the document where we've actually looked at and profiled the characteristics of the whole region's population, and it gives us a really powerful insight on which we can build, tailoring solutions to the local area rather than necessarily adopting a one-size-fits-all.
I think it also shows how we're sort of a region of market towns, and we have got some large towns, but an awful lot of smaller towns, and that public transport connectivity is so difficult at the moment, particularly. Laura, you mentioned the environment a little bit there, but I just wondered how you think the strategy fits with the wider environmental ambitions of the region, and how can we fit the transport strategy into that? How do the two mesh together?
I think there's a really strong alignment between the ambition for the green arc as part of the transport strategy. And what I think we've been able to do is get some really strong collaboration going between some of the organisations that sit as part of the Environment Working Group contributing to that. The Environment Working Group's also had an opportunity to be a bit of a challenge on the emerging transport strategy. So we picked up on the issue around the people side of things, that big focus on connectivity. So we need to think about the system as a whole. So you might do part of your journey active transport, walking, cycling, get on a train and do the rest of your journey. You might drive a part of your journey and then do your last part on foot or cycling. We need to think about that. I think we also were able to build in some of the work about behavioural insights that I talked about earlier. And I think also beginning to think about environmental net gain, how that feeds into the transport strategy. And I think an emerging piece of work that will need to come through is how, when we're looking at an economic appraisal of key projects, how do we make the environment a stronger theme of that? So I think that there's been lots of positive interaction between the role of the Environment Working Group and the transport strategy. And I think probably the other challenge that we put in is, was the ambition strong enough around climate change and net zero? And that's part of the work that's come through, I think, thinking about some of what the options are and the different ways of looking at that. So I think there's a lot in there. I think that hopefully some of the feedback that we get as part of the consultation is how that element can be strengthened.
Thanks very much. There's a couple of questions from Linda Forbes around, will we collect data about gender disparities in travel, how different genders, and also about ageing population and how older people travel differently in rural areas, and particularly around driving. I just wondered, is there any information, or will we collect information about how different genders, different ages travel? I'm going to go to Martin first.
So thank you, Mayor Dave. I mean, just building on what we were talking about earlier, as part of the evidence base, and it's important to understand that in looking forward, we're starting from an understanding of what we have at the moment. So the work we've done as part of a project called First Mile, Last Mile has both looked at good practice around, not just in the rest of the UK, but around the world. But we've gone into and developed persona segmentation, if you like, of the population to understand travel characteristics in terms of their day-to-day lives on right here, right now. Moving forward, I mentioned earlier about the program of connectivity studies, and that's a real opportunity to use that information to then work with our local partners to say, what is it that we actually need to address here? What are the questions? So rather than thinking that just because there's a problem on the transport network, we start off with a transport solution. What is it that the community, what is it the businesses are looking for? What are the questions we need to ask ourselves? And how do we use the information to look to the future? You mentioned there, Mayor Dave, about an aging population. Parts of our region, we will see over half of the population above retirement age within the next 20 years. That changes the nature of the ask. It changes the importance of transport, and we need to be responding to that. Laura, you want to come in on this one?
I think if people haven't had a chance to start looking at some of the persona work that EEH has been working on, it really is a lot of information that can guide some of the decisions that we make in the future, and gives you an idea of, will people use public transport, or do they prefer to be in their own vehicle? How we could encourage people to walk and cycle. So in Luton, we're in the position that we are looking at our new local transport plan kind of at the same time as EEH. So we're going to be using some of that data to feed into how we develop our local policies. And as you'll know, Luton is different in that we have a very young population, and it's been really interesting to kind of understand how that applies to Luton, and particularly around the town centre, where you should be able to walk and cycle in easily. It's in a good time that you could do it. Probably takes you longer to drive into Luton town centre than to walk and cycle from large parts of the town. So we'll be able to use that data to target some of our communications activity. So really important, and goes back to that whole thing about people. The transport system is for people and goods, the point that Emily raised around freight, but that people dimension is really strong.
Thanks. Emily?
I think adding to this from a young person perspective, my 10 years either side of my age are looking at house buying. So we looked at the house prices across the Heartland, because someone like me probably has to buy a house in a different area to maybe where I'm working, and that will change the commuting patterns of young people. And I think that's covered in the strategy, and it's a really important point to look at the house prices in different areas and what type of people would have the normal commutes there. So from a young perspective, that's really important for me.
Thanks, Martin.
I was going to say that's a really excellent point from Emily, because I mean, one of the things we've got as part of the evidence base is we understand where the planned growth in terms of housing and economic opportunities are over the next 15 to 20 years. If we understand those patterns, but then we work with the communities to understand what their aspirations are, we can get a solution that's meeting their needs rather than what we might think their needs are. And I think what we've seen with the last few months is we're seeing some of those norms that we did have being challenged. You may not necessarily go to an office quite as often as you did, but when you need to get there, you want to be able to get there. And if we're going to tackle the decarbonisation agenda, then making it easier to get there by public transport is going to be important. I just want to also, if I may, Dave, just pay a compliment to the companies that Emily, member of Skanska, one of our delivery partners, and right the way through this journey on the transport strategy, we've been working very closely with our delivery partners, because they've got expertise and knowledge about how you can do things different, how you can innovate in terms of delivery. We're an innovative region, and we've got talent within our delivery partners that we can tap into.
Absolutely. And I'd like to thank them all for their support through this, all the partners and everybody being involved in it. Chris Todd just asked a question about how we'll get DFT, Department for Transport, to change its funding regime, which operates in silos, and actually instead funds connectivity and allows the region to decide that. Now, I'd love it, the three of you, to have the answer to that question. I'm going to give you a go at that, but if people have got an idea about how we can do that, can you either put it in the questions, or actually in the consultation process, can you actually feed it in? If you've got ideas, we'd really appreciate those, that to sort of either put in the questions now, your thoughts as opposed to just questions, or send them in during the consultation programme. Remember, you have till midnight on the 6th of October. Having given Martin some time to think about how he's going to solve DFT's silo-based funding, I'll go over to him and see any ideas, and then over to Laura and Emily.
Well, I think, Dave, let's give credit where credit's due. One of the reasons why the department supports subnational transport bodies such as EEH is it recognises the power of political and business leaders coming together and having a single voice about what is important for their region. There's nothing that makes life, depending on your perspective, easier or harder for the department if you have a single view about what is important moving forward. So I think the first step is actually saying, here's a strategy which is ambitious, which is bold, and sets out our regional ambitions, and provides the framework for the local partners to do it locally. The second step is to actually have some more clarity about the funding.
Martin, they have of course turned up to, I think, all the forums, to actually been there and engaged in the conversation throughout the preparation of this as well, which has been really helpful.
Yes. And I think the second stage, Mayor Davis, is to get the funding. So rather than having individual pots of funding, look to devolve some of that funding to the region. Allow us to say, well, actually, if we're achieving this outcome, then we'll use our strategy, which has been through this process, and we'll use it then to work with our delivery partners to get things done, to get things on the ground.
Laura, Emily, do you want to add anything to that?
absolutely agree with Martin that in an ideal world, having a pot that's flexible for the local area to decide what it wants to deliver and what's important would be fantastic. I'll leave that as my aspirational dream, but in reality, it's almost as important though that you get alignment. So if we're talking about transport schemes, how does that align with our local industrial strategy priorities? How does that align with our environment ambitions? So a good starting point is the point Martin said, strong strategy sets the framework, and then you can begin to deliver around that. But if anyone is listening, having a flexible pot would be fantastic.
Emily.
I agree that I think there needs to be like real long-term investment, so that when I'm perhaps 10 or 20 years older, then there's not resilience projects being completed. So to have that money to be able to complete this work now in order to future-proof and to have a system where freight can work with perhaps car-free cities is really, really important, that they tie together and invest now so that we're not doing resilience later.
I think I'd just like to add in that the secured funding for DFT and all the transport projects to allow them to actually work with us, and rather than in terms of transport terms, relatively short-term funding of sort of 5 years or so, we need a longer-term fix. Neil Gibson asked a question, just to change tack a bit, about town and commercial centres under serious threat with post-COVID-19 world. What kind of strategy, what transport strategies can we have in place to try and support the town centres and commercial centres? Laura.
Thought you might come to me. So I think actually there's a lot we can do on town centres. So town centres have always been a focus for public transport. They've always been a focus for commercial development. I think the challenge at the moment is their role in retailing. So we have got to rethink what the purpose of town centres are. And I know that, for example, in Bedford, the work that's going on for the town deal there has got that theme around how you link the station back to the rest of the town centre. In Luton, similar issues, but we have the advantage that the station is in the town centre, but not in a good condition, and how we make better use of that. I think making use of public transport and really making that a strong focus is important, but fundamentally you've got to make the town centre attractive for things to do. So town centres have got to have a new role in the, they needed it anyway, but COVID has made that even more significant. So town centres, which have to have be a new community effectively now, are where that sustainable transport, active travel, walking, cycling, connecting to public transport can be made real. It's a really exciting opportunity to do something different.
Thanks very much. Does anybody else want to come in now? I've got a number of other questions. If we just mention about freight, Julian Worth asked a question about freight. It's a major issue that's been tackled. Could anybody say anything in the panel about decarbonising freight, and to what extent is modal switch to electric rail a key component of the strategy? I think talk about the strategy, so I'll let Martin kick off then.
I've got to say, I think maybe again, we're already starting to see the benefits of subnational transport bodies working together across the country, across England. There are 7 of us. And let me just take an example of one key project from a freight perspective, which is the Felixstowe to Nuneaton route. And the 3 STBs, ourselves, Transport East and Midlands Connect, recently wrote to the Chancellor saying, in terms of the prosperity of the UK, investing in this route and delivering improvements at places like Ely and Hawley Junction, fundamental to the long-term and actually short-term recovery of the UK economy. So you've got a strategic voice going right into the heart of the government on the importance of freight. Moving forward, we need to be bolder, I think, in terms of how we make provision for freight. We need to be thinking actively about what are the opportunities and how we invest in our rail and our road networks, because there will be still some road freight that we need to deal with in terms of the trunk movements. But how do we make provision for it rather than reacting to a demand? Let's plan positively, give the operators the opportunity to plan for moving across to rail, which is a way of decarbonising freight straight away, and let's work with the system and work with the market.
Emily, you got anything? You're nodding away there.
I think a big thing that we focused on when working towards the draft strategy group was the first and last mile. So I think that will be of significant importance, especially as we try to move cars out the city and people on active travelling. So I think that will be really a key area to watch.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think the journeys between towns and cities can be quite quick, but once you get to the last mile or the first mile, there's often the longest bit, and even that's rail, how you get from a rail station to your end destination. Laura, anything to add on that, or move on?
I just think that we've got to also think about town centres and that role in. We've got used to your parcel being delivered to your door, but actually some of the things that we've been thinking about and what you are beginning to see is parcel deliveries being at a collection point to fit in with your day, and also on what businesses need and the flexibility around times and things like that. So probably some changing our thinking around freight and what businesses need and how we interact with that as customers.
Thanks very much. Early on, Mark Knowles asked a question about, is there an intention to review the decision not to electrify East West Rail? I don't think it's ever been off my list. I think it should be electrified, and I think we'll lobby for that. But I don't know, Martin, in terms of the strategy. And
I think we heard from Greg Smith earlier in his introduction that in terms of the equipment being purchased, it will be capable of using electric. And I think what I see through the working relationship that we have with Network Rail, and in particular their system operator, it's a very strong and positive relationship there, and it allows us to understand where the industry is talking in terms of having a rolling program of electrification, because clearly from a long-term perspective we need to be having a rolling program to have the efficiencies that allow us to do that. We've got teams doing electrification, including the Midland Main Line at the moment. We need to use that experience and roll it out and accelerate it. So I think there are opportunities for us to press, particularly given the importance of the decarbonisation agenda, to get that clarity and move forward sooner rather than later. And I think, Mayor Dave, that was one of the things that you as political leaders were wanting to lobby for in the run-up to the spending review.
Indeed, yeah. Heather Pugh asked a question about we don't tackle the land use and the planning. So there's always a conflict between the relationship between infrastructure and land use. And I think that's absolutely true. Trying to get the link between the planning system and infrastructure is very difficult. And you're quite right, Heather, that is something that needs to address. And I think we have tried to do it in terms of the design of new settlements, and a lot of work around that. But it's about how you link in existing settlements that is more of a challenge. Any comments on that conflict between land use and infrastructure needs? Not, go on, Laura.
So I just think that having a strong strategic transport framework helps in that discussion. But then you also need strong local plans sitting at the local level that work with that and have a strong feature around transport. So I think we've got some of the solutions. It's how we work through the existing system. It's probably more about the delivery timescales, that it takes quite a long time to bring some key transport projects forward. So Mayor Dave, you always talk about the number of roundabouts on the A1 in, I couldn't remember the number, but you always talk to me about the number. And then if I think of in Luton about a project that we've wanted to do to give a kind of strategic ring road, might not be the right thinking anymore. It's been around as a project since 1937. We still haven't done it. So, you know, HS2, other projects, it's that timescale thing that I think is the challenge, because local plans tend to be on 5 years, 10 years, and some of these big infrastructure projects take even longer than that to go through the system and deliver. And that's where I feel some of the challenges.
Thanks very much. Thanks for all the questions, and do keep putting them in, but we're going to stop doing questions. I'm going to ask the panelists just to say sort of a maximum of a minute sum up, but I'll kick off to give them time to collect their thoughts. I think we started with Greg Smith. He did mention at the end of this about the connectivity in terms of digital connectivity, and I think across the sub-region, we've seen a lot of that. We've known it exists about the black spots in terms of where we haven't got infrastructure for broadband and where we haven't got mobile phone reception. And though in my own borough there's something like about 97% have got what's deemed to be superfast broadband, that still leaves about 2,500 houses without broadband. And I have one village where 1 year somebody doing GCSEs and A levels, not this year, they actually had a timetable for the 16-year-old who could be online for the village, and then a later time slot for the 18-year-old to be on time. And the village came together to actually make sure they had access to the internet. And that surely can't be a time that we need to do that. So the alternative was to travel somewhere to get internet. And I think COVID-19 has shown us that we can work at home, but the stress is actually having the online connectivity. So I asked my wife if she could not go online during this to do anything to give me the bandwidth to make sure I didn't opt out while chairing that. Likewise, I've given up bandwidth when she's chairing a meeting or been in the meeting as well. So I think that's key. If we can work successfully at home, then we don't have to travel. And I know I've committed to some of the meetings I have will not return to 4 meetings. We'll probably have 1 in 4 where we physically meet up, because I think that's still important for mental health reasons, if nothing else. So I think we need to link into this, that digital connectivity, but it also gives you the information that you need if you are travelling on public transport, to actually knowing when the buses are going to arrive, or knowing when the train's going to arrive, or having that through ticketing, which I think is so important. I'm going to go to Laura and then Emily and then Martin for a brief, less than a minute if you can.
So the things I think that are really important to take away is people focus around the system and how we get people to use it better. Absolutely agree with you on that. Best use of digital to make it easy for people. And then the really strong theme around decarbonisation and climate change. They're really strong themes in the strategy, but we can probably do some more around that. Absolutely agree with you on connectivity. Digitally, Luton's position is, I think we're at something like 99%, but as soon as we start using Skype for Business, even parts of the town, that system doesn't hold up for us. You know, I gave the example that I was trying to meet with one of your officers on Thursday, Mayor Dave, and we resorted to the old-fashioned telephone. That was the easiest thing to work.
Nothing wrong with telephones. Emily.
I think for me, what's really important is providing the infrastructure so that we can all make low carbon daily lifestyle choices. And I'll just leave it there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for keeping to my brief remit. Martin, there's a challenge.
It's a moment in time. I think we genuinely have a moment in time to think about and choose which direction we want to move forward. The draft transport strategy is a chance for your views to come through to shape the future. It's a way of linking the investment in transport with digital, with energy systems, so we have a whole system that supports our communities and our businesses. If we crack that, then we're genuinely shaping tomorrow today.
Thank you very much. I've heard that several times from you this morning. Because finally, can I just thank all the people involved in putting the transport strategy together? Much appreciated to not just officers at the English Economic Heartland, but in all our partner local authorities and partner businesses and stakeholders. And all the colleagues on the forum, elected members who have actually been on the forum for the last couple of years moving this forward. And to the people organising the webinar, thanks very much for all of you that have come in. 224 have stayed to the end. And finally, to Martin, Laura, Emily, thank you for actually being part of the panel, and earlier on to Greg. Thank you very much, and please do remember to actually engage in the consultation. It finishes 6th of October at midnight. Thanks very much. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.